Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Wong, one of the APITA Alumni Affinity Leaders and a volunteer with the Wisconsin Alumni Association. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our craft beer tasting with alumni brewers. Though we are unable to gather in person due to COVID-19, we are thrilled to bring Badgers together for this virtual event. Before we begin our program, a few reminders. We welcome your comments and questions throughout the program tonight. Please use the chat feature on YouTube to ask your questions as our speakers are presenting, and we will do our best to answer them both throughout and during the Q&A session. The tasting portion for this evening is optional. We remind you that anyone consuming alcohol must be 21 years or older. And as always, we ask you to please drink responsibly. Our alumni brewers have also recommended some wonderful snacks that pair well with the tasting. Joining us this evening is Robin Shepard, Associate Professor at UW-Madison and Assistant Dean for the UW's Division of Extension, and serves as the Executive Director for the North Central Cooperative Extension Association. For more than 20 years, he's written historical and academic articles about the Wisconsin brewing industry. He has also authored 3 books and numerous travel articles for various newspapers and magazines, is a frequent guest on Wisconsin Public Radio, writes a weekly column about beer for the Isthmus newspaper in Madison, and is a 3-time award winner of the North American Guild of Beer Writers. Tonight, Robin will be serving as our moderator for the program. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, welcome to a UW Alumni Happy Hour with Badger Brewers. We have some 900 of you joining us from across the continental US and at least a half a dozen countries from across the world. I think it's fair to call this a happy hour. When you cross that many time zones, it's bound to be 5 o'clock somewhere. Unless you happen to reside, I guess, in some area of Nepal where I think it's just past 5 a.m. Interest in craft beer is really quite fascinating, isn't it? To put out a call to join us for a beer and we end up with that wide of an audience. In places like Wisconsin that love our beer, well, that interest is especially strong. There's a serious side of this, though. It's an industry that contributes nearly $5.3 billion in economic impact to Wisconsin every year. Nationally, beer sales are declining, yet the interest in craft beer, well, it continues to grow. In 2019, roughly 13.6% of beer sales purchased in the U.S. were a craft beer product. That's according to the American Brewers Association. Now, today, we have about 8,300 breweries across the United States. That's a long way from 1980, when the United States had just 8 large breweries. Well, there's an impressive number of UW-Madison graduates who work in the brewing industry. Just a quick count by me, I know at least 15 Madison brewers who consider themselves Badgers. I'm confident there are many more of those across the United States. We've selected 4 UW Brewing alumni to raise a glass or 2 with us for the next hour. Now, just a note on the tasting, remember that this is a happy hour and it's about quality of the beer, not quantity. Despite what you might have picked up for college skill sets on how to polish a pitcher, that's not what we're doing tonight. I guarantee you, if you drink all 4 of these beers for the next hour, you don't need a terminal PhD to know that you're going to be terminal. So why don't you just sit back, enjoy, follow our conversations, participate through chat, just relax and sip along. Ashley Kinart-Short is the brewmaster at Middleton's Capital Brewery. Ashley grew up in Milwaukee and moved to Madison for college. She earned her UW degree in biology and Spanish. If you were in Madison about 10 years ago, there's a good chance that Ashley might have served you across the bar at the Old Fashioned. Now, after UW-Madison, with a growing interest in beer that was fueled by her homebrewing habit, Ashley signed up for an international brewing diploma from the Siebel Institute of Technology in Chicago. That experience took her to Germany to study abroad at the prestigious Doemens Academy in Munich. Once back in Wisconsin, she landed a job at Capital in 2013, worked her way up to brewmaster in 2015. Her first beer at Capital reflected some of that German training when she created a Schwarz beer called Fishing in the Dark. Also joining us, Phil Hoechst was born in Germany, but grew up in Fitchburg, just south of Madison. Phil has an undergraduate degree in zoology and psychology and a doctorate in physical therapy from UW-Madison. His wife, Sarah, has 2 degrees from UW-Madison. His father was a professor in the physics department for 34 years. Most of that time, he was director of the university's world-renowned Synchrotron Radiation Center in Stoughton. Hop Haus opened in Verona 5 years ago. However, Phil and Sarah opened their second brewing facility in Fitchburg just a few weeks ago. Now, we'll hear more about the unique challenges that they had to work through when they opened up a new brewery in the midst of a pandemic. Trevor Easton is brewmaster and owner of ALT Brew, a gluten-free brewery in Madison. Gluten-free beer is more than a niche. It's really a segment of the adult beverage market that's growing rapidly, very rapidly. Trevor founded ALT Brew about 7 years ago, literally in the back room of another brewery. It was space that was dedicated to an isolated area, much like a clean room in a laboratory. That's where he could experiment with a small brewing system and try out different types of gluten-free ingredients. That led Trevor to refining his recipes and determining some alternative ways to make gluten-free beers. Over that time, he gradually released them to drinkers, and in doing so, that helped him establish his brands and his name recognition. Trevor's now a leader in gluten-free brewing in Wisconsin. Trevor comes from a Badger family. His degree is in engineering from UW-Madison. His grandfather taught civil engineering and mechanical engineering on campus. His mother, father, and sister are all Badgers. So is his mother-in-law and his father-in-law. His wife, Maureen, had a slight departure with an undergrad degree from the University of Iowa, but later came back home to Madison to get her law degree. I guess it was necessary to do that to come back into the family. Scott Manning is brewmaster and co-owner of Brewing Company. Scott found himself kind of in brewing in a rather serendipitous way. He grew up in Sauk County, went to UW-Madison, where he majored in German literature and filmmaking. And Scott will help us connect some of those dots to the brew house maybe a little later on. What's important for now, though, is noting that when Scott was an exchange student in Germany, he had a major, let's call it a role, in developing an appreciation for those old world brewing styles. After graduation, Scott set out to pursue his dream in movie making. On his way to California, his car broke down in Tucson, where he eventually found himself with a brewery job out of necessity. That opened the door for what became a true labor of love. Scott eventually moved into a regional brewmaster role, supervising a large supporting cast for the BJ's Restaurant Breweries. That's a well-known brewpub chain in the southwestern U.S. But when his family called in 2009 and asked if he would be interested in coming home, well, you could say they offered him the title role as brewmaster in Vintage Brewing. It was, forgive my reference to the movie Godfather, an offer he couldn't refuse. Now, 10 years later, Scott's the star among brewers. In 2019, the Great American Beer Festival, the largest beer festival in the U.S., named Scott Best Brewpub Brewer of the Year. The Vintage team got Best Brewpub for large-scale brewpubs. So with that, welcome all of the Badger Brewers to tonight's happy hour. You know, the past 6 months have certainly been anything but normal. There are many aspects that we hope will not be part of a new normal. And we have learned to cope with the challenges that we faced. For breweries, brewery owners, their brewmasters, their staff, the industry has been impacted in many different ways. So I think let's start there from the four of you. How have you seen your brewery adjust in coping with COVID-19? Ashley, why don't you start off?
First of all, I'm really thankful that in the summertime, we normally are just open outside in our big old beer garden. So that kind of naturally helped us kind of transition from a little bit of a shutdown to having a safe place outside for people to come and drink beer. But other than that, a lot of trying to do off-site sales. So we're very, very lucky to be selling bottles and cans in grocery stores and liquor stores around. But so yes, we've also been focusing on doing growlers for some of the stuff we are already, that we aren't doing in bottles and cans, and are actually going to be firing up a teeny tiny little canning line to get some of those that are only available on draft out into people's hands to take home with them from the brewery. So yeah, it's been interesting.
All right. And Phil, you had just an interesting ride the last 6 months. There must have been a point of almost no return when you're in the midst of putting the walls up for a new brewery, and then all of a sudden it's the shutdown in COVID-19.
Yeah, it was. It's been an interesting 6 to 9 months, but I think the name of the game was being able to pivot, being able to shift, and being kind of nimble about. We had we had beer in tanks in March, and we were expecting a big spring, and then everything got shut down. And within a week and a half, we had labels, we had cans, and we had stuff in cans going out the door, and our support from the community was awesome. So yeah, so being able to kind of shift and rely on other brewers and other breweries in the Madison area was awesome. And I think everybody's kind of scrambling, and so we made it through. There were some sleepless nights, but it was, we made it through.
Okay. Trevor, how about you?
Well, the fact that we're sitting in my tap room on a Thursday evening and it's absolutely, it's closed, there's nobody here, is a really strange place to be. But, we had a lot of the late nights where we totally revamped how pretty much our whole business model worked as a small self-distributing brewery, and figured out how to basically package our beer so that we could sell it in 4-packs, and the response has been really nice. And it keeps beer coming out, and we've been able to do a lot of our sort of fun, hazies and other Oktoberfest and beers that we wouldn't be able to get out to the public out through our tap room on really basically through 4-packs. So it's been nice.
And Scott?
Yeah, so we operate.
We'll give Scott just a second to see if we can capture his image.
So we went how still there?
Yes, go ahead.
So real touch and go through April and May, but we're going full for now. We're really thankful that we've got some event space, and especially our patios. They're really a great buffer for right now. And we happened to put a small canning line into operation last year, and finally got the kinks worked out, and that's really been a boon for us too. Prior to COVID, we had sold about 80% of our distributed beer in kegs, and now it's flip-flop, so it's about 20% in kegs and at least 80% in cans. So we're lucky to have made that decision a couple of years ago.
Well, despite the challenges that you're hearing about from our Badger brewers, let's allow ourselves to enjoy a few beers with fellow UW alums and friends around the world. For the next hour, we'll all be just part of a virtual happy hour with the emphasis on happy. Welcome everyone that are joining us on YouTube as well. Now, with that kind of festive atmosphere in mind, I think probably a good place to start is with the Oktoberfest. If you haven't yet, that's your permission to go ahead and open a Capital Oktoberfest. I get the feeling that you're probably already ahead of me on that one. Capital Brewery was founded in 1984. Its first beers were offered in 1986. It's Madison's oldest brewery in the modern craft beer era. It was started by Ed Janis, who owned the Madison Muskies. Some of you joining us on YouTube may remember, if you're old enough, that Janis owned the Madison Muskies, and he wanted to serve his beer at the ballpark, and that was one of his incentives to get Capital up and running. Today, the brewery has a diverse portfolio. However, it's widely recognized with its German-style lagers, more than 240 national and international awards. The brewery was named America's #1 brewery by the Beverage Tasting Institute at the World Beer Championships in 1998. Now, I'm sure that some of you watching have been to the brewery's beer stube, or maybe seen the brewery through those wonderful glass windows that look out to the copper brew kettles. Maybe you spent an afternoon or lost an afternoon in the Capital Beer Garden. That's a place that's really wonderful this time of year normally for Oktoberfest. Traditionally, Oktoberfests would be served now. In Wisconsin, we see them cropping up maybe a little earlier than October. I think distributors like to put them on the shelves maybe as early as July. If you think about it, a beer with the name of October might not sell quite as well in November, say. Wisconsin brewers like to joke that to be a real Wisconsin brewery, you're required to make one. That's a nod to the German heritage that we have in Wisconsin. Traditionally, the Oktoberfest would have made in March, and it would have been served in the fall. It originated in the 16th century, but it was the wedding of Prince Ludwig with Princess Teresa von Sachsen-Hildenburg in October of 1810 that put it on the map. It became the festival beer at that point. I think from my Badger alumni colleagues around the country who may have traveled with the alumni to Germany, maybe in 2013 and 2016 on those special trips, I'm going to raise a special cheers to you tonight. Ashley, you after attending the Doman's Academy in Munich, Oktoberfest really must be a really special beer for you.
Absolutely. It was not only just coming back from Germany, learning how to make beer from Germans. So kind of getting to Capital felt like a really natural transition from school and into this brewery in particular. But so yeah, their focus on German style lagers is a big part of my training. So it's been great. It was beers I really love to drink, and I knew I had a little bit of background that I thought I could at least bring some knowledge to the table in getting a job there. Yeah.
Okay. So what about the qualities of Capital is Oktoberfest? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so most traditional Oktoberfest, like as Robin said, it's a party beer. So they tend to be a little bit higher alcohol than kind of your average lagers. Not too incredibly high though. Ours clocks in, I think, about 5.6%. So not too crazy, but nowadays the kind of the traditional Oktoberfest in Germany is a little bit lighter. I think they do go for a little more volume, so it has lightened up quite a bit than what we here in the States kind of consider an Oktoberfest. So you can see them from a deep golden to almost a really dark, clear, kind of burnt sienna almost. So kind of an amber with some nice orange highlights. Ours is kind of right in the middle there. So yeah, Robin's got one right there, as you can see. And so my favorite color is orange. My favorite season is fall. So there's so much about this beer that just screams all of my favorite things. It's definitely on the malty end. I've had a few that are a little bit sweeter. I know some of the traditional German ones tend to get a little bit more sweet. Ours is just a touch more balanced. It's got a really nice malt profile you get a little bit of kind of toast and biscuity flavors in there. We use a whole bunch of Munich malt, a little bit of caramel malt. So the caramel malt will give you that beautiful orange hue and a little just touch of that kind of caramel on the finish. We use some aromatic malts as well. So it's got a really nice big nose on there. So that's one of my favorite parts of, it's fall when you pick up a big glass of Oktoberfest and you get that really nice malty aroma. And then we use some Liberty hops, which are not traditional German hops, but they are an American grown descendant of the traditional Hallertau hops that you do see in a lot of German lagers, especially Oktoberfest. So yeah, kind of your American version, using ingredients we have here, but that have somehow come from the old country to bring us those ingredients.
Yeah. Well, I put it in the marbled stein just for you, Ashley. I figured that was about as traditional as it can be.
Oh, yeah.
Drinking it with a Prost and a clink with a friend.
Absolutely.
Wait, talk to us a little more about the idea of traditional elements in an Oktoberfest. You hinted that the hops are sort of a signature to the way the Germans brew an Oktoberfest.
Yes, absolutely. And part of my schooling in Germany, we actually got to do some tours through the Hallertau region, which is where a lot of the noble hops, which is a part of a little bit larger family from some other types of hops in that area that go into Pilsners and a couple other different lagers. So that was really cool to drive through. It was a little early in the year, but we got to drive through some hop fields and tour some a hop processing facility. So we got to see how they actually turn these big, huge vines in flowers into these nice little pellets. And it's almost hard to describe them. Sometimes they say spicy or herbal are the kind of characteristics of some of these noble hops, but it's just something. I think there's this little bit of flavor. It's really German flavor that you can't really put your finger on, but that's where those hops are coming from, and that tastes good. So yeah, so using and we're actually kind of right about the same parallel, and as well as kind of the Pacific Northwest as the Hallertau hop growing region. So hops grow pretty well, not only in Wisconsin, and used to be a huge hop grower, but yeah, so that it's pretty easy to grow some here that have pretty similar flavors to the traditional German grown ones.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I remember right, this particular beer was one of the earlier beers from Capital when it was getting itself established in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, our first two beers were our Pilsner and our Munich Dark. So again, sticking with those German styles. And we actually were we were promoting ourselves as German beer, German lagers. And we got a letter from essentially the country Germany saying, you aren't brewing in Germany. You can't say these are German beers. So we had to market them as German beer brew or Wisconsin beer brewed German style. And our brewmaster had actually come from Germany. So we said we didn't import the beer, we just imported the brewmaster. So we were trying to keep as traditional as possible and make that good German style flavor right here at home in Wisconsin.
Now, older drinkers in the Madison area will probably remember that signature that you got off to a great start with German lagers, but Capital is a little different today. And I'm kind of wondering, you've been now brewmaster and had a 5-year run here to put your signature on the brewery and some of the beers that you're offering. Where have you taken Capital?
So when they kind of first, as kind of a little test, you mentioned my first recipe that I did, the Schwarz beer, the Fish in the Dark, which was, again, sticking with the German lager, but because I didn't want them to think I was going to, take an opportunity and go in some crazy direction that the company as a whole that had been already running for, I think it was already 30 years and, in progress. So I wanted to make sure they knew I was comfortable and realized that we had not brewed a Schwarz beer in the time that we had been brewing all these lagers. And nowadays and just in about 2 years ago now, we installed a 7-barrel, kind of a small batch pilot system. So instead of the big batches of our German lagers, our seasonals, the Wisconsin Amber, all the stuff you see all the time out in the stores, out in the bars, we've been doing a lot of just a little more research and development, some really fun little small batch stuff. I get to do my research on all of the new hops, all the new ingredients and stuff out there. Even right down to we've been doing hard seltzers and just got our license to do a hard cider. So we are venturing in all directions because I just love learning, and if we can make it, why not give it a shot? So yeah, I've been doing all across the board, IPAs to the lots of imperial stouts, all kinds of fun stuff, and yeah, all the way down to the hard seltzers and ciders.
Now, brew houses have been mostly staffed by male brewers. Today, the Pink Boots Society is an avenue for female brewers to gain training, education, recognition, strengthen their collegial relationships as a group. How has the brewing profession changed?
So yeah, when I went to brewing school, it was a 40-person class, and I was one female in all of them. There was one other lady who did one of the smaller sections, but other than that, the entire rest of the program was all dudes and me. So from then to now, I think almost every brewery I see has at least a couple of ladies somewhere in the brewery. I think once upon a time, I know craft beer has also kind of gotten into the direction of just for females to start more often. There's, I know at least in the Madison and Wisconsin area, there are a whole bunch of female-oriented just enthusiast groups like females enjoying microbrews and Girls Pint Out. Check both of those out if you're in Madison, and then Girls Pint Out has a couple different chapters all over the state. So I think not only are women as a whole more interested in craft beer in general, so more of us are excited about it and want to make it for a living, but it's just become a lot more welcoming and open arms, and things like Pink Boots Society, where there are groups that you can just go hang out with a bunch of girls and drink some beers, and everybody feels super comfortable being in that female atmosphere. So yeah, it's great to see people who are more likely to get out and learn more, talk about beer more in that kind of group. And I love being there to support those people and bring more into the industry.
Well, we're seeing a lot of comments in the chats that they from folks all around that really like the style, Ashley. So they love Oktoberfest. You picked a few others for us that if you're not joining us from the Madison or Wisconsin area, we've tried to supply you with some alternatives that you might look for, and maybe highlight the ones that you have selected. Why did you pick those, Ashley?
Paulaner, I know that's always between that and Spaten, I think are the couple that I know. I'm going to see those around town. Those very easy to get a hold to, at least here. So I kind of assume if here in Wisconsin, we can get a hold of these German Oktoberfests pretty easily. I thought probably around, yep, there you go.
I found one.
Yeah, and then I tried to pick an East Coast and a West Coast. Both Brooklyn Brewery and Odell do a really, really good job across the board. So their Oktoberfest as such are excellent beers. So I wanted to make sure to give a broad range. And other than that, just if you see the Oktoberfest style, give it a shot. And it's a good, easy drinking beer. It tastes great, and it reminds me that fall is coming and Halloween is just around the corner. So
I couldn't agree more. It's one of my favorite styles when push comes to shove in terms of picking, that one beer that I just can't walk away from. It's got to be the Oktoberfest. Oh, yeah. Ashley, thank you for joining us. We're going to pull you back in towards the end. For those of you who still have questions for Ashley, keep them coming, because we'll have a Q&A session toward the end of the happy hour with everyone involved. Now, switching from the traditional Oktoberfest that goes back hundreds of years, like Ashley was saying, we're going to turn our attention to one of the newer beer styles that's emerging from the current craft beer movement in the United States. Now, these are beers that are hoppy, they are hazy or cloudy, they have these wonderful juicy flavors of citrus and orange and tangerine. As we said earlier, Phil and his wife Sarah opened Hop Haus in 2015 in Verona. Their new place in Fitchburg just opened on September the 2nd. It's a 13,000 square foot facility at its heart, 15-barrel brew house. That's a big jump from his early start with a 3-barrel system in Verona. The new brewery also has its own canning line, and that gives Phil sort of the ability to control his own production. Phil, you've been a very successful physical therapist. Why switch to beer?
That's a lot of people have asked that question too. So I think, that I played around with. I brewed beer in the backyard when we used to live in Denver, and we moved back home here and wanted to open up a little brew pub. And apparently people like the beer, and it's certainly a whole lot of fun to make it. So I guess you only live once, and you might as well just let it rip. And here we are.
So hashtag Hazy, the beer that you brought for us. That was, I actually came out on opening day, and that was the first beer. You can hear that? That was the first beer that you offered in cans. Why hashtag Hazy cans over the bar, very first beer out the chute?
That was, so we, without getting into the whole history of, we brewed at our Verona location for years. We ran out of space, so we had a contract brew for a couple of years before we actually had the ability to build this location. So we wanted to put Hazy into cans because it's been our best-selling beer over our tap room or over bar for the last about 2 years. But just, couldn't get it done, couldn't get it into cans. And so we knew that was one of the things we wanted to do here first. So that was the first beer that we put into cans here. We're very proud of it, and I think that the label's pretty cool.
Yes. So with hops in the name of your brewery, you got to have a good stable of hop beers, right? What's driving the American taste right now? Why are hops such a big fascination?
I just think there's obviously so much variety there's malt, crazy varieties of malt. There's yeast-driven beers. I just have always been a hop guy, and I love experimenting with all those kind of flavors. So even if I wanted to brew a beer, like let's say a traditional lager, if I wanted to go and show Ashley if I can brew a lager, I might say let's do something fun at the end and add some hops that add a little bit of lemon flavor or tangerine or something unique. And so I feel most comfortable trying out different and unique new hops, or maybe not even unique hops, but maybe putting them in a beer that traditionally wouldn't be hopped. So you can get all kinds of cool flavors, aromas. Instead of adding orange peel or lemon peel into a beer, you can add a hop that has those kind of same qualities. So I just think it's fun.
Now we see your new brewery in the background.
That's correct. If you could hear, I've got lots of active fermentation going on here.
That's great. Why don't you walk us through what we should be tasting and smelling in #Hazy?
Yeah, so hazy, without taking up all of your time, kind of a departure from the traditional IPA. So IPAs, I always think about like late 90s, early 2000s, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, that kind of thing, where it was bitter, had a lot of hop aroma. People couldn't really, if they didn't like bitter beers, it wasn't for them, right? And then fast forward about 8 or 9 years, then there was like the black IPA, white IPA, all these offshoots of IPA, right? And those have kind of gone by the wayside. And then all of a sudden, this hazy thing came along, probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. And I would say they're not totally different than a regular IPA, but from the malt bill. So, I mean, instead of using just straight base malt and some caramel malt like they used to, hazy's got oats, it's got wheat, so a lot of more mouthfeel. That's where you actually get that protein haze in the beer. The water chemistry is different. So again, it's more of a fuller mouthfeel. It's, people say like, oh, it's a fluffy, it's a lighter beer. We actually change the water chemistry to make that beer. And then the actual hopping strategy, that when to add hops, it's not about bitterness. It's really about aroma. So we add it at the end of the boil. We add it into the fermenter during fermentation. So while the yeast is active, so there's lots and lots and lots of hops, but it's not meant to be bitter. So you're getting tons of like tangerine, citrus, all those kinds of flavors. Some people say like, oh, it smells like orange juice. That's what you're going for. And it does have that hazy, that look to it. So it's those proteins from the oats and from the wheat that's still in suspension. It's not from yeast that's in suspension.
Mm-hmm. Now we're getting some questions in the chat box, Phil, about the availability of your beers. You're just getting your legs underneath you right now, but what's your plan for distribution? Yeah,
so we've been in distribution in Wisconsin, so the southern third of the state. So state line to state line, so Milwaukee all the way to Dubuque. We go up to about the Dells right now. Pretty soon we're going to go statewide, but that'll be in cans. So all your major retailers around town will have that. We're scrambling. It's been a big undertaking to get not only the canning line up and running, but still serve this tap room and the Verona tap room. So we're trying to get it out there. We're working on it.
You mentioned the proliferation of hops, and especially in the last 5 or 10 years, there just seems to be a constant stream of new hop varieties. Even hops from different regions of the world, maybe regions that we didn't really look at or think about as being hop production regions of the world. I think the last edition of the Brew Your Own magazine had something like 150 varieties are now identified for commercial purchase. I'm sure there are more in the research pipeline, but where do you think those flavors are going to take us? What gets you excited about the future of hoppy beers?
Just thinking, it's just, there's so much potential out there for, when people say like, oh, I don't like hoppy beers, but it doesn't need to be a bitter beer. It needs to be a hoppy beer. Just there's crazy hops out there now that you can, whether you dry hop with them that taste, they've got like pineapple, and I mean, you could have like tropical drinks that taste like this, so like sweet, pineapple-y, like almost coconut flavors. And that's just coming from hops. Right. So, I think it's awesome. They're breeding all kinds of new hops. I think it's awesome, and you can get them. The best part is that now really the hop industry is driven by small places like this that want to get their hands on some cool stuff versus the big guys that reside maybe in Milwaukee that can't, it costs them millions of dollars to rebrand something. So we're the ones that actually get to decide what those farmers are growing, versus the big guys who just want kind of the same old.
Yeah. Now, a few years ago, the hop shortage really caused an escalation in hop prices. You worry about that happening again?
No, I think that hopefully people, we try to forecast out enough in future to tell, our companies how much we need, and they tell their farmers how much they need to grow. And I really think that everybody, at least in the small craft brewing community, is in the same boat, right? So if I'm out of a certain hop, I can call up Ashley, I can call up Scott and say, hey, can I get 44 pounds of this, or can I borrow much and I'll get you back? And people, they're great because they know that, hey, if it comes to them, that maybe they're going to need to lean on me. So I'm not going to hoard stuff or stockpile hops, right? So I hope that continues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is it about starting a new brewery? What's that like right now? I would guess that it's a little tough to understand, maybe even know who your customer base is actually going to be.
I think we've had this feeler out for a couple of years, and our other brewery is only 6 miles away, but a lot of families, I've got a young family, there's tons of families that come in here that they need a place that their kids can hang out and they can have some good food. Parents want to have some good food, have some good beer, and just really, we just want to bring community together. So that's what we've been all about here, and also in front of us since we started. That's what our whole mantra is bringing community together over a pint of beer and worthwhile conversation, right? So that's our whole thing, and we're sticking to it.
Yeah. Now we should point out that you're not just serving hoppy beers. You've got some other, styles on your beer menu. You even have an Oktoberfest on, I think, right now.
We did. It sold out. Sorry. So we made more than we did last year, and we still sold out. So we're aware of the situation. 2021 we'll have more. So we've got anything, a bunch of lagers in the tank. We do have some stouts. I love barrel aged beers. We do a lot of Belgian stuff. So we do, even though we're called Hop Haus, we still love to expand and to have kind of a well-rounded portfolio to offer to people. Yeah.
Now, you've picked a few other beers that you're recommending for folks who may not be real close to Madison, be able to drive by the brew pub or brewery and pick up a 4-pack of hazy. What other beers kind of fit into this hazy category for you?
Yeah, so Oscar Blues, who I believe is probably distributed nationwide now, but they're 1E, which is their 100-calorie IPA. Their Can of Bliss, which is I think it's kind of a rotating series, but it's all hazy IPAs. Sierra Nevada's Hazy Little Thing. Even Lagunitas has a Hazy Wonder. They're in all 50 states, but you should. I mean, you walk in any store, they're going to have tons of variety. I think there's just everybody has their own interpretation, but the style is really, it's different than what you traditionally think. And people that don't traditionally like IPAs or say, I don't like hoppy beers, I don't like bitter beers, the IBUs or the bitterness level in these ones is low, and it's just tons of aroma. It's easy drinking, and they're normally lower alcohol than we traditionally seen in a lot of the IPAs.
Phil, thanks a lot. I can continue to hear that fermenter bubbling away in the background. If you need to check it, you go ahead and do that, but we want you back here in a few minutes. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and move on? Gluten-free products are a big growth area for food and beverages. In the next 5 years, the annual growth rate for gluten-free beers, it will probably be hovering right around 15% annually. And we see big growth expectations for ciders and the hard seltzer market that also fall into that gluten-free brand or could fall into the gluten-free category. ALT Brew offered its first beers in 2014 using a one-barrel system in a specially enclosed room that was in another brewery, Madison's House of Brews. It was really a small hands-on operation. I remember, Trevor, you were kind of doing everything on maybe homebrew equipment or even smaller.
Yeah, it was just a step up. We started small just so we could, test stuff out. And I'll also want to thank Paige from House of Brews. He's also a UW alum, which was nice to get started because I went and worked for him. Really, trying to start a brewery is a challenge, and especially trying to start a gluten-free brewery. Many years ago, people pretty much always said, well, why don't you start a brewery and then just brew a beer that's gluten-free? And we said, no, you don't understand. Everything has to be gluten-free in what we're doing. We didn't want to have any cross-contamination or potential issues for our customers. We wanted to pretty much make it so that they would feel 100% safe because we did all the work to make that product 100% gluten-free for them.
Now, you didn't just start a gluten-free brewery because it was an interesting business niche. This was personal for you, wasn't it?
Very personal, yeah. My wife, who I love dearly, and we used to, I was a home brewer before, and we would, brew the beer and enjoy it and raise it. And then she got diagnosed with celiac and couldn't drink the beer with me anymore. And I did one more brew of all grain in our kitchen, and I spent more time cleaning up afterwards than the entire brew process took, because I didn't want to get her sick after that. And so I took a short departure from home brewing, and then decided I missed it too much. I loved the formulating recipes, the enjoyment, and just the challenge, and the sort of actually having a product that you could enjoy at the end. So I got back into it and said, how hard could it be to brew gluten-free beer? And it was actually quite challenging. I think I appeased the beer gods, because I dumped so much beer down the drain that we finally were able to get a product that our friends and family had no idea was gluten-free.
Yeah. One of your very first beers was the Farmhouse Ale, and that led you, I think, down the path to one of the great Badger names, Rustic Badger Farmhouse Ale.
Exactly. Yeah. Pretty much Rustic Badger is as close as you can get to the original homebrew recipe that we developed. Fortunately, we get, being on the commercial side, we have more access to better hops and a lot of better ingredients. So it's actually even better than the homebrew tasted. But this was what really got us started. We had this, and there was a couple other breweries that we had tried that were commercial variants that would do a one-off gluten-free beer, and they would. We remember trying their stuff and realizing, wow, we're way ahead of the competition here. And so we really would like to get a brewery started, and that's how we got into it.
So the gluten beer taste like malt-based beers?
So, we always are trying to emulate styles. There's obviously, we're working with a different ingredient palette. We've got 5,000 plus years of brewing beer with barley and a handful of not. But one of the things, we've been really always striving is that we want to brew beer that happens to be gluten-free. So this isn't, there are beers out there that are, gluten-free beer, and they just basically take the ingredients and just said, well, this is a gluten-free version, and that's what it's supposed to taste like. And we've always been trying to elevate that and really make amazing beer that just happens to be gluten-free. Because I personally, I'm not celiac, it's my wife, and so it's got to be a beer that I enjoy, that she can enjoy.
Walk us through what we should be tasting in Rustic Badger.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got, very inviting, a little bit of spicy nose to it.
Yeah, so with Rustic Badger, one of the things I really want to do is let the yeast really shine in the style of beer. So it's got a Belgian yeast in it, and when you first initially smell it, you should get a little bit of that yeast sort of nose. When you taste it, you sort of almost have like an upfront, little bit of crisp apple comes through very nicely. And then it finishes with actually, and this is all derivative off the yeast, a slight pepper note. And that's all from the yeast actually pushing, those are the esters that come through. And one of the things we always do, it's kind of unique to brewing ales, but it's sort of the German way of doing it, is we actually ferment them at cooler temperatures than a typical ale for longer periods of time. So we get a very nice, super clean product that really lets all of the natural characteristics shine through.
Yeah, very much what reminds me of a Saison. I guess it is a Saison. It's a Farmhouse Ale, but that wonderful, dry, peppery finish, it really is wonderful, Trevor.
Thank you.
I think, German brewers, they sort of have this saying that, the soul of a beer is the malt, because it brings that sweetness, sometimes that roasted background. And the malt's kind of what other flavors tend to hang off of. So with gluten-free, what's your range of substitutes for malts? What kinds of things do you put in a beer that will ferment that also sort of do that function of malt?
Sure. The easiest way to answer that is the things we don't use. Is we don't use wheat, barley, or rye, or any derivatives off those, and we're very careful about any ingredients we put in our beer. But what we do use is millet, sorghum, rice, honey. We use a lot of Belgian candy sugars, really trying to look at it and just say, we've got to, whatever we can use to bring it in, so we can get a beer that we like and tastes good, is how we kind of, we don't really worry too much about like that, following a certain standard of like only using a malted barley, just because obviously we can't. So it really opens the door to a lot of different ingredients, and we try to use those and let the quality of the ingredient shine through in the beer.
I have a comment in the chat box from Dave Chang. Trevor, your story is so sweet, and your work is quite literally a labor of love.
It absolutely is, yeah. Yes.
And it's also wonderful, I think, for visitors when they turn up in your tap room that we occasionally see you and your entire family enjoying a beer or two.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we are quite a regular here. My 3-year-old son, Sawyer, is always asking to come back to the brewery, and he's here frequently and loves it, and will. I hope he will appreciate. He will be working here at some point soon.
When you do recipe development, what goes through your mind as a gluten-free brewer?
So we always start, like, I love when we are developing recipes, we usually go out, and depending on people's dietary needs, selecting beers of like whatever style we're trying to go for, and like, let's pull the ones that we really like, and then just do a ton of research on them, so that like we understand really why a beer was, is that style. And that really helps us when we're then are picking our ingredients that we're using, so that we can kind of pull that back and make a beer that really is, to style, and really nobody would notice the difference between it. So it's really a fun time developing them, and it's probably our favorite thing for staff here too, because we obviously have to go out and buy beers and try them and bring them back, and then just try to make it work. And we never, we're always hitting what we're trying to do, but then we look at it and say, okay, if we've got something that's really good, like, we're going to just keep going that way. And so always trying to drive the flavor forward and just make a really excellent product.
Yeah. Now, you've picked a few maybe national, regional gluten-free beers that you'd like to highlight if if you're not really from the area. Why did these make your list?
So all of these breweries are independent, dedicated gluten-free breweries across the country, and I've been fortunate enough to meet all of these brewers. I've tried other products; they're always very good. Now, they're going to taste different than the Farmhouse Ale, but I know if anyone's looking for a gluten-free product, these are all excellent ones to try. And we have Ghostfish, which is on the West Coast out of Seattle. Holiday is in Golden, Colorado, and Ordox out on the East Coast.
Thank you, Trevor, very much for joining us. Stay around. We're going to bring you back in just a moment, and we'll have a Q&A with all the brewers in just a few moments.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Well, our next Badger brewer is Scott Manning. You might say that his Vintage Brewing emerged from the UW campus, or at least the edge of it, okay? Vintage Spirits and Grill, located on University Avenue, just across the Fluno Center, short walk from the Cole Center. It was the early vestige of what became Vintage Brewing Company. It was an early installment in a kind of a pub bar format. There wasn't a brewery there at the time, but that's what was the successful model that worked for Vintage. And his family came calling to see if they could entice Scott to become brewer at Vintage. In 2018, Vintage opened its larger brewery in Sauk. It's a great place along the Wisconsin River, wonderful views of the water. For those of you who've been in Wisconsin in the winter might remember that it's a great place to see eagles feeding along the Wisconsin River in the heart of winter. In 2019, Scott and his partners opened a 4th location just down from the Capitol in the East Washington neighborhood that's just about 2 blocks from the Capitol Dome. Scott, growing up in Sauk City area, Sauk County, did you ever think that you might someday, be a co-owner in a brewery?
No, it never crossed my mind when I was a kid. Of course, of course, we grew up with beer around us. It's a Wisconsin institution, so my memories of that were like, well, my Uncle Donnie saying, well, favorite nephew, wouldn't you get me a beer? And of course, you want to be the favorite nephew. So, but I think it really, beer is a thing that was always around me. It took some fortuitous things to happen for me to really get the tap of fate to say, this is what you should be doing with your life. mean, one of those was taking a year abroad from the university to Bonn, Germany. And to that point, being 20-something years old, beer was just something you drank. And it was really about the effect. It wasn't about the enjoyment of it. And the whole point of meeting with friends over in Germany was to explore different flavors and try different things. Bonn's in the Rhineland, which is situated perfectly for jumping off to points to the north and points to the south and east and west. So there's just lots of great things to travel to and to try out. So I think the bug kind of bit me there. It was hard to come back to finish my senior year at UW and look at a normal beer the same way anymore. So at that point, I was scrounging all my change and trying to buy the good stuff, which, that's 1995. You're talking Pete's Wicked Ale. Anybody remember that one? Sierra Nevada, and of course, Gartenbrau, which became Capital. So it was slim pickings back then, but I never knew I wanted to be a brewer.
Now, when you opened Vintage on between Whitney and Odana Way, that intersection in 2010, you put a Belgian double on your menu called Dedication. Why put that beer as your starting lineup?
Well, actually, it was we had 4 fermenting tanks at that point, and 3 of the 4 beers we initially made are still on the menu. So I kind of studied what the Madison scene was already making, and I didn't want to cross paths with the brewers who were already here doing great things. So there weren't a whole lot of Belgians at that point, at least that I could tell from afar. So I put that on the menu right away. I figured, let's make a big, bold Abbey double to really show what we're all about. We're coming into this new territory for me, at least, and Madison's already got good brewers, so you have to kind of show them what you're worth. And beyond that, the name is special for me because it's really a double entendre. First of all, it's a dedication of, it's like when you're christening a ship or dedicating a building. It's a dedication of a new business. That was the first meaning. But the second was it was a beer to thank all the friends and family, especially, who pitched in so much to help us get off the ground. I'm sure the others can attest to it. Anybody who's opened a business, it's not a singular effort. There was a lot of people who, polished the windows and knocked out walls, everything. So this was my kind of thank you to them as we launched our brewery.
So walk us through a little bit of what we should be tasting in Dedication.
Well, this is a beer that's all about the yeast, really. I mean, yeast and malt. So there are hops in it, but those are only as an accent. So when Phil says he focuses on the hops, this is kind of the opposite, where you're going to focus on the yeast. This one's a classic Trappist yeast strain. So if you don't know the history of Abbey ales, they start in the monastic tradition, which means these are monks who were brewing beer at their sites to sustain themselves. So the order of the day was, and still now, it's you do things to either sell to make the monastery or abbey self-sustaining, and any kind of excess profit you have goes to charity, goes to helping other people who are less fortunate. So this one probably resembles most closely, I would say, Chimay, maybe La Trappe. So it's got that nice spicy notes from the yeast. First of all, I'm going to smell a little hint of ginger, or I get a little bit of banana. First, it's that nice whiff of bready yeastiness, but coupled with that, there's some spice notes that are hard to put your finger on. So right off the bat, with a yeast like this, if you treat it right, you get some amazing complexity. So the backbone of the beer, of course, is the malt, though. So it's complex there too, without being difficult to comprehend. It's our base Pilsner malt, and we've got 2 different kinds of highly kilned caramel malts, which give you a nice toffee and roasted impression. And there's a little bit of chocolate malt in there too, which is a really darkly kilned barley, which of course there's no chocolate in it, but it gives you that impression of cocoa. So all in all, it's a really complex beer, which at 9.2%, you're not going to chug this beer. This is the beer you're supposed to kind of cradle in your snifter and let it warm up. This one's amazing. If you take it to a beer fest, people who come to your booth and say, "Oh, I don't even like beer. I don't want to try that." The wine drinkers will gravitate to a beer like this. They never knew there was beer that tasted like this. So you can kind of entice them with those kind of descriptors and say, "Well, stop, swirl it and sniff it." And it takes you on a journey, when you're drinking it. Yeah. From the aroma to the taste to the afterglow, it's quite an experience.
out of respect for the beer and for you, I looked in my closet for the largest goblet chalice I could find for this beer, thinking that, this is the kind of thing that, you can envision a monk holding up, right? It's a religious experience to enjoy this beer, Scott.
I'm glad you said that. If you think about it, the monks, they had a lot going for them. I mean, there's the love of God and all that good stuff, but there's also the vow of chastity and there's the vow of poverty. So these are the creature comforts that keep you going, I think.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about, you kind of being headed toward a filmmaking career. I think there's a dot here connecting this beer. Didn't you make a version of this beer that was barrel aged that ties back to your interest in film? The Cabernet of Dr Caligari. You remember that one?
Thanks for reminding me. So this is a beer that ages so well in barrels. I mean, I had to rack my brain a little bit because we put it into whiskey barrels, rye whiskey barrels. We put it into various wine barrels, that one included, and it just does amazing things. When you lay a beer like this down, it kind of mellows out its spice notes. The hops that are there are totally muted, and it really picks up on whatever else you've got going on from the barrel. If people aren't aware of barrel aging, it's an amazing thing for a beer. You can add attributes of whatever spirit or wine came from the wood to the beer, and in some cases it doesn't work, but in a lot of cases it works really well. So what Robin's talking about is the Cabernet of Dr Caligari, which any film student's will have gone through the German Impressionist phase, like it or not, and it's just really bold, angular stuff. Germans love their angles; they love their harsh angles. But that's a movie that really stuck with me over the years. In a weird way, it's kind of a predecessor to the horror movies of today, just being so starkly shot and so dramatic. And it's from 1920, I believe. So so that was a nod to my film school cronies there, naming a beer that. It was a wonderful beer. So again, the Dedication in its raw form picked up all these wonderful, red grape, fruity Cabernet notes, as well as the kind of warmth of the wood. That was a wonderful beer.
Yeah. So, Scott, one of the things that I think I've heard other people sort of say about vintage is that, you came on the scene and you approach brewing a lot like a chef. You think about the different flavors, and you've always been very, innovative in terms of what you would make a beer with. How's your life changed now that you have a quasi-production brewery associated with the Sauk facility?
Well, I will say that we've slowed down the creative side a little bit, only because we've had to satisfy those distributor accounts, and that's been mostly canned product. So for the most part, that's 5 or 6 brands just over and over again. But I'm really looking forward to when we can get ourselves upright again, get through this pandemic, and I'm just chomping at the bit to make some experimental stuff. As a matter of fact, I've already packed my truck full of some malt for tomorrow. The guys don't know it, but in Whitney Way, they're brewing a new beer tomorrow. Phil was talking about different hops being really out there. So we're going to do a Hazy IPA with Sabro hops, which are supposed to have this pineapple meets coconut. And I really can't wait to unlock that secret.
Now, you've selected a few other doubles for us to think about. Why'd you put these on your list, Scott?
Well, 2 of those are actually the top one. Chimay Red is just one of the classic Trappist doubles, actually, made by monks. And the other ones are ones that might be a little more readily available. So Unibrew Maudit, that's going to be from Quebec. So a foreign beer, but not necessarily from the traditional Trappist brewing region of Belgium, Netherlands, France. And then Ommegang Abbey Ale and New Belgium are probably most widely distributed for most folks out there. And those are also pretty good. I left one off, though, that I think is probably my favorite from way back when. Might have influenced me on the Dedication, which was the Brother Polonius from North Coast. Any West Coasters out there, that's a brewery and a beer that I especially love. So if you can find it, please give it a shot.
Oh, Scott, you did leave off one of the best Badger named beers. Your Ask Any Badger, You're Better Off Red. I just think that's another one of those great beer names. That was one of your early beers too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. That's a funny beer. Better Off Red is now a red IPA, but it became a red IPA long before that was a thing. I I'll admit, brewing in small batches, you take some liberties sometimes. And I was getting to know my new system in the West Side Madison location, and I got a lot more caramelization from the kettle than I thought I would. So this beer was supposed to be a pale ale, and the initial iteration ended up as a red almost. But I really liked it. So I'm like, what we're going to do? We got to push that even deeper into the malt territory, and we're going to really bump those hops up to make it something that's not even out there. So I liked it especially too. We talked about it like, well, it's really better off as a red, but it made total sense to me and what we're doing here. So
very true. Great. Scott, thank you. It's so much fun to talk with you. We're going to bring back all of our brewers now and take a look at our chat box. So if you've got a question on your mind, go ahead and send that in. Let me start with one while we're taking a look at those questions. I'll just sort of throw this out. It doesn't have to be all of you, but if any of you want to jump in. You've heard the saying, when you say Wisconsin, you said it all. If nowhere else, probably the mantra of a Badger sporting event that you've been attending. So what does a brewer think when you say Wisconsin? Okay, Scott, go ahead.
I would say underrated little guys.
Oh.
We're so dominated by at least one big player that I think some folks around the country don't give us our due. There you go.
Very nice. Very nice.
No, I would agree that the local little spots, even just a couple miles around, people are like, oh, I haven't heard of you. Like, where are you guys at? And there's these cool little pockets, almost like they were, hundreds of years ago in Germany, where everybody's got their own little place, and there's little communities. So it's kind of cool to see all those little kind of sprout up again.
Yeah, great. Ashley, Trevor, you want to jump in, or should we go ahead and look at the other questions?
I'm going to say, not just because we make a lot, but just lagers in craft breweries. I think we all kind of had a good chuckle when, like, maybe 3 years ago, somebody in craft world was like, lagers are awesome and the next best thing. And almost everyone in Wisconsin, like, yeah, we've been doing that forever. Like, where has the rest of the country been? So, what was kind of a stigma at a less quality beer, because all the really big macros are lagers. I think here in Wisconsin, we know that there are plenty wonderfully delicious, super flavorful lagers. So that's something I've always appreciated about almost every brewery in the state, if not all of them.
Great. Trevor, any thought?
Yeah, just the spirit of Wisconsin moving forward. Like, just keep developing, keep moving. Challenging, dealing with things as they come, and I think from all the brewers I know, I feel like whenever we reach challenges, we just put our heads down and keep moving forward.
Yeah. We have a question from Amy and Doug Klug. Any of you grow your own hops? Is that even kind of possible to supply your own needs?
We actually do grow some of our own hops. I've got they're incredibly well growing species of plant in our yard, and we do sometimes make it in the tap room. We would use them in pretty much we'd run them through what's known as a hop rocket and do like really almost like a fresh hop beer with them. But it's a very limited fact of. It's also a lot of work. I appreciate all of our hop growers that do all that work, because it's a lot.
Now, I know most of you have a range of different ingredients that you use, quite a wide range of malts and hops as well. Where's the source kind of primarily for your core malts that you use? And maybe do you use what amount of that might be Wisconsin grown? Scott, do you want to jump into that maybe first?
Yeah, so we make a lot of every effort we can to try to source locally. It's easier on the restaurant side. We're really well supplied by a lot of local agriculture and also manufacturing. On the brewing side, it is available, and we've turned to using Malt Europe, which, despite its name, is based in Milwaukee, and so that's where our malt is. Well, it's malted. But we asked about with Wisconsin grown, and it's a bit high in protein for use. I've found. I think the more people show interest, the more acreage they'll devote to it, and maybe that'll improve. But at the time being, we're using Malt Europe, but we haven't. We've made special batches which are 100% Wisconsin malts, but it hasn't been great for us all the time.
Yeah, Ashley, you still make island wheat, don't you?
We do. We do use Breeze Malting. They have some locally grown wheat that actually some of their wheat flakes that they just carry as their part of their regular offerings are grown just outside of Green Bay. The wheat on Washington Island isn't as plentiful and doesn't have that kind of malting quality every year. So we've kind of expanded it to just be Wisconsin wheat. So luckily it's much easier to get a hold of Wisconsin grown wheat than barley. So that was a smooth move on our part, many years ago that beer was first created. But then, we've also used a lot of stuff from Malt Europe, and then Breeze, which is a Wisconsin based malting company as well. For the most part, Wisconsin doesn't grow probably enough barley to support a full brewery. So for specialty brewers and fun small projects, but then we do a lot of Wisconsin wheat for those things on the side.
Yeah. We have a question from Ben Haas of Huntington Beach. I assume that's Huntington Beach, California, maybe. Has it been harder to source kegs and cans, aluminum, stainless steel? Look at the heads raising. Phil, Scott, you want to jump into that one?
Yes. I would go with the yes on the kegs part. We don't need more kegs. Like Scott was saying earlier, we've shifted our model. Instead of sending out a lot of draft beer, people want it in package. And I've got a couple stacks of pallets of cans, and those are very, very hard to come by. Since March, it's been, whether it's, there's been shipping delays, and there's been can delays, and there's been, I would say we're all very good at just rolling with the flow at this point, because you can't get too upset about everything.
Yeah. Scott?
No, Phil's exactly right. It's been tricky. It's not just the aluminum. That's been in the news a lot. So that has been one problem, but it's the little things too. Sometimes you can't we use what's called a pack tack, which is like a 6-pack holder, and it snaps on. Those were out for a while. And it's every little thing has had its moment of interruption, and it's frustrating. You just have to look yourself in the mirror and say, hey man, you're making beer, so just chill out, will you?
Yeah. One of the trends I think you guys have seen is that lighter, lower alcohol beers, more sessionable kinds of beers has been a big trend as of the last maybe 3 to 5 years. Can you take that a step further? What about low alcohol, non-alcohol craft beer? Does that enter your thinking at this stage? Trevor?
Yeah, I know we actually get asked for non-alcoholic craft gluten-free beer all the time, and which is a challenge. It's very hard for us to do, but we understand the need, and we've been definitely moving and looking at different styles that can have a lower ABV to kind of keep everyone that doesn't want to even our Farmhouse Ale is at 6.6%, which is that's a big beer and should be enjoyed slowly. And you understand people are looking for lower alcohol, but some of the actual science behind making good non-alcoholic beer is equipment dependent, and you need a good vacuum system to be able to pull that out, and those are very expensive pieces of equipment.
Yeah. How about competitive shelf spaces? How tough is it to break into a local packaged liquor store?
Very, very hard.
Where's that?
It's I think even when I first started, at Capital, there were maybe 4,000 breweries in the country. We've doubled that since my time just at this one place, and it seems like more and more people, especially right now when we don't have that option to bring in the volume to our tap rooms to be selling all that draft beer, so that that shelf space out at the liquor stores and grocery stores is right now just really, really extra counting. And even leading up to that, more and more people are distributing from state to state across the country, even the world. So it's, every day is a new challenge and a new person that, being kind of the old school kids, we kind of had first dibs on a lot of shelf space before any other craft beer was really around. So it's definitely a challenge.
Trevor, I bet there are unique challenges with gluten-free, not just shelf space in a store, but finding tap accounts was probably a big challenge for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, tap accounts have always been challenging just because we always want to make sure the product is treated right, and making sure we've got out there. And we lost 70% of our customers overnight, pretty much, when the stay-at-home mandate went in. And fortunately, a lot of our grocery store and wholesale accounts did pick up a lot of that slack, but it's almost sort of a double-edged sword. We had a product people wanted, and they'd clear the shelf, and we would be there almost the next day, and we'd already have other products on that shelf. And it's like, we're doing the best we can, and this product is selling. So can you keep the shelf space open? So it definitely is a challenge out there right now, because there's a lot of products, and a lot of people come through that didn't have had a taproom model strictly, and we always had we started wholesale first, and trying to keep that going, and is a challenge.
We have a question coming in about business models for those of you. I guess this probably would go to Scott and Phil. You both recently expanded. During that exercise, what did you learn about the business model for brewpub small breweries that maybe you didn't anticipate? I mean, does the model still apply in all of this? I mean, beyond the COVID world where breweries are headed, what is it about the modern brewpub model that you kind of you think back and maybe rethink where things are headed?
I think we are headed towards what we used to be, again, back in Germany, where I'm from. Like, every local community has a brew pub. You're still gonna have the big players in the game, but people want to tie to community. They want to tie to who's in the beer. They want to be part of that community, right? So that's why we created our tap house in the first place in Verona. That's what we did here in Fitchburg, is trying to build community around the beer. Don't just push out beer. I mean, that's what I think, is every community is going to have a couple. We're not going to be the big dogs, but I feel like it's going to be every single community has their own little thing, and that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Scott?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's exactly why we decided to put down roots in Sauk City, is because of the proximity to family. It's a place we knew and loved, and we knew it was a great place, even though people laughed at us. A town of 3,500 people, why would you do that? But it's turned out all right for us. I would also say that it's a good time for brew pubs, I think, because there's that buffer of, if there's so much competition for shelf space, you've got the food angle could maybe carry you for a while. And that's gone back and forth. I mean, I started as a pro brewer in '97, so I've been around a little while. And there's definitely times when you didn't want to be in the brew pub business, and there's definitely times that right now I think it's a good place to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got time for maybe one last question here that will sort of throw this open to all of you. In a time of this pandemic, have any of you brewed anything special for the pandemic, either, a special beer serious note or tongue in cheek?
Anybody? So I had our 8-year-old do some artwork for us. So we named a beer March Sadness because first they wanted to go to spring break. They wanted to do all these things. And so we did release 4 packs of 16 ounce of a hazy IPA. It was great. And my son did the artwork for it. And I think it was a fitting name. So we'll see. We'll see what we can do with that.
That's great. Well, a special thanks to all of you for participating in the Badger Happy Hour. You know, there's a saying that guides a lot of craft beer enthusiasts and beer travel. It's think globally, drink locally. Well, tonight on our Badger Happy Hour, I think we've been brought together remembering some ties that were about the University of Wisconsin, maybe the beers that we had when we were in the Madison area, while at the same time we were able to share those memories globally through our virtual connection. So with that, cheers to everyone, and I raise my glass to fellow alumni and friends all around the world on Wisconsin.
Cheers.
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 On behalf of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, thank you so much, Robin, Ashley, Phil, Trevor, and Scott for a fantastic evening. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us tonight. We hope you've enjoyed the program. We also hope that you can join us for our upcoming program on Wednesday, September 30th, when we bring you Beyond Health, the social impacts of COVID-19. Thanks again to all of you. Be well, and on Wisconsin.